Are you a Swiftie, Ben?
No, absolutely not.
Are you not? Oh, God, I'm proud of you.
It's just because that music sucks,
Yeah,
man.
it does. It
It's
sucks.
like
I'm with you,
I
Ben.
was listening. I mean, I know it's like really old coded to say, but I was listening to 90s music the other day, and it's just like so much better. Like,
okay, so guys, I'm just going to put this on. For
This is Juggernaut 2.
Should we just listen to this for the course of the episode? Is that?
Yeah, I love that.
It was tough medicine.
It felt like a nuclear bomb.
Nobody's ever gagged me and never will in this business.
ANZUS is in effect a dead issue for the National Party.
And I can remember just being appalled and shocked and stunned.
Miss Richardson has held fairly extreme views.
For me, it was a triumph.
So that's a shameless promotion for another podcast, Juggernaut 2, which is now available on all podcast platforms. Last time around, here we stuck the whole first episode on the GBL feed, didn't we?
Yeah, but we figured that we don't need to do that now because everybody already knows.
I think we decided that. So instead we just played you that bit.
That's right.
And encouraged you. And Ben and Annabelle will now also encourage you to go immediately to Juggernaut and subscribe if you haven't already and listen to it.
Honestly, I reckon you should push it out on the Gone By Lunchtime feed because I don't want any of the lunchies to miss out. It is so good. It is so good, you guys. Like, go and subscribe.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate that.
It's my fave.
So do go and like and subscribe or whatever it is you do on your podcast platform.
and speaking of 90s music being better than the music today, banger after banger on Juggernaut season 2 episode.
It's so true, Ben. Like, I was shocked at the amount of reggae music political parties were using to promote and as their campaign songs.
Yeah,
we've got Joan Bolger shredding on the ukulele on election night.
Yeah.
Nationals campaign song, something positive, just
it sounds like a police honestly, UB40 mashup, eh?
It really is a nice place to be, the 1990s. Come join us there. Now, on the agenda today, we might talk a bit about the asset sales, another 1990s, 1980s classic returning to the fore. Te Pāti Māori. If we get to it, I'd like to talk a little bit about the latest on the Zero Carbon Act, but let's start with the IPCA report that came out yesterday, looking into the whole Jevon McSkimming debacle. Absolute shocker of a read. Like, it's one of those things, you just scroll through it, 120 odd pages of it, and you just kind of, your jaw is on the floor looking at some of the many occasions on which essentially processes that were put in place with these fancy-sounding titles that almost always include the word integrity, people at the highest level of the New Zealand police used those mechanisms to do the very opposite of what they were designed to do. What happened was Jevon McSkimming, who was at the point applying for a higher role within New Zealand police, some complaints came in against him to a range of areas, some of them presented in not always coherent ways, from a former lover, almost 20 years his junior, who had been a non-sworn staff member of police, warning against his behaviour.
Who he had connected with that job and sought to have it work out of not the normal location, but an office closer to his. Yeah,
that's right. And rather than putting these complaints through the channels of people who are expert and experienced and trained in dealing with such complaints, these complaints were essentially seen off at the pass by these senior members of the New Zealand police. I mean, have a read of the IPCA if you feel you have the stomach for it. It is quite shocking. Among the various responses to this, it was suppressed for a time, this report, owing to other ongoing court action. McSkimming, the allegations have not been proven against McSkimming, it's important to say on this front. He has pled guilty and awaits sentencing on separate charges relating to the materials that he had viewed on his computer, which came to light following the ultimate investigation in term that was related to this. The new commissioner, Richard Chambers, said this morning on the radio that he does see this as a cover-up. He said, yes, that's the way he sees it. The Public Service Minister, Judith Collins, when asked at a press conference last night whether there were this amounted to, in part, whether there were examples of corruption, her words were, if it looks like a duck, or if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it doesn't look good. She did note, and this is important, that the IPCA does not describe it as corruption. Mark Mitchell has said it's atrocious, indefensible, all of that. It's really infuriating. I know from conversations I've had to people in the police who are involved in some of this work. Specialist adult sexual assault investigators are appalled. These are the people who are actually expert at this sort of stuff. It's worth noting as well, just quickly, there are a couple of heroes that you see come through in the IPCA report. A lot of people who aren't heroes, a couple of heroes, I think it's Officer D and Officer M, who in spite of everything, in spite of the most senior people in their organisation, among them Andrew Costa, who appeared to be doing everything they can to say nothing to see here, who fought on and said, no, this is not, because I should have mentioned, this ended up with the woman, the complainant, who's described in the report as Ms. Z, rather than her complaints being taken seriously, the Harmful Digital Communications Act was thrown against her. She was arrested. One of the senior officers involved, when asked whether or not she'd made a complaint, said, well, she didn't make a complaint when she was arrested about this. It's as if that's the opportunity she had to make a complaint to police when there are police literally in the process of arresting her. It's a bit of a shocker all round. I'm interested in your thought overall, Annabelle, but one of the things that seems to me to come out of it on the whole is the assurances that we're given that this is a matter of, Mark Mitchell used the word bad apples this morning, that they have removed these senior leaders who behaved appallingly and essentially looked after their own. The struggle is a couple of things. One, these people were not some rogue element in a regional unit in the middle of nowhere. These were people who had been promoted to the very top of the New Zealand Police, one of the most powerful organisations in the country. And second, the IPCA does point out that there wasn't a collusion between these people, which on one level, good. This wasn't a concerted campaign, as the IPCA claim. If it wasn't concerted, is it not then systemic or cultural? Is there not something else there? And look, I know some people who are doing fantastic work in police over the years, since the Bazley inquiry of 2007, was it, who are doing all they can, but we continue to see repeated examples of failure to satisfactorily address complaints of a sexual nature. Where does that leave that question? Is it satisfactory to say, no, it's not, the process is all right, it was just some bad apples?
I think that people who are reading or learning about this story, there'll be many who are deeply shocked by what's been covered by the IPCA, but I think unfortunately there'll be many more who are not shocked by what they've read, and it, for them and many others, including myself, it raises questions about if this is the level of integrity and care that's being exercised by the very highest leaders of the New Zealand Police, what does that say about the culture of police at the community level, particularly when it comes for women who are coming forward to complain about, sexual offending against them?
Yeah, Richard Chambers, the police commissioner on Morning Report, he made the point, or came out very strongly, sort of saying, look, police certainly have updated their practices in terms of dealing with complaints of a sexual nature, and the distinction he made was that this was kind of, I guess, more in the province of, the Old Boys Network protecting their own. So, the complaint being made against a senior police official, as distinct from the way that, what you might call ordinary sort of complaints of a sexual nature are made. And, I've done work with prosecutors, and it certainly seems that the police have improved the way that they sort of handle dealing with victims, over the last, say, 10 years, particularly since, the sort of aftermath of that Brett Shipton case. But look, it's easy to say, just a few bad apples. A very small number of the actual police force was involved in this, but of course it was pretty much everyone at the top level was complicit in trying to just basically sort of sweep this, under the carpet. Particularly, and the IPCA said, pressuring the IPCA to sort of, cut short their inquiry so as not to interfere with McSkimming's application to become police commissioner and to run the whole thing.
Yes.
And the irony of all of this, if you want to tie it in with popular culture and performative males, is that, Richard Chambers, the current commissioner, was sort of seen as a bit of an outsider amongst the police leadership. McSkimming was their preferred candidate because Chambers was seen as a bit of a, bit old-fashioned, a bit caveman, a bit unsophisticated, not sort of, kind of quote-unquote woke enough, but lock him up and throw away the keys sort of thing, and didn't have all these sort of sophisticated kind of approaches that Costa and McSkimming had. But then, of course, peel it back one layer, and it's just the same Old Boys Network protecting their own, and putting, their sort of politicking and their friendships ahead of, even investigating complaints. So, Andrew Costa's currently on leave from his role as the head of the Social Investment Agency. Ironically, that's the government agency set up by this government to investigate how you can make the most difference in the lives of vulnerable people with early interventions. So I would, if I was Costa, I wouldn't be sort of planning on it. I wouldn't be scheduling any meetings in that role in the near future. It's an extremely Audrey sorry incident based on the report.
I thought it was interesting in the report where it talked about Deputy Commissioner Tanya Kuda saying that it was sort of known amongst their group that McSkimming would possibly litigate if he missed out on that role, and that he had the resource and capacity to do that. And so that was a part of the reason why they were reluctant to look properly at the allegations, and were more preoccupied with making sure that he got an absolutely clear run at that role.
That's right. And so the clearly they became so gripped by the sense, for whatever reason, whether it was McSkimming's own influence or a particular mentality within that top brass, that the natural justice that must be applied to his application for promotion within the New Zealand Police was trumped paramount. Everything, such as these numerous complaints going through the proper process. There's a line that has been extracted in an RNZ piece, which I think is quite telling and kind of goes to the nub of it. and that's Officer D, who told the IPCA, that's the Independent Police Conduct Authority, that before she'd been involved in the case, that was the handling was something like this. She said, "We have just not followed policy whatsoever, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist. Jevon has tried to get rid of this by making a complaint and making Ms. Z the villain, when in actual fact, what he perhaps should have done was gone, can someone look at this and investigate it and get it cleared up? Because I've got designs on the future and I want my integrity intact. So I welcome an investigation. Let's get it cleared up, get it out of the way. But you know what's the worst thing? If you make a mistake, the only worst thing you can do is then cover it up. You paint all sorts of nice words of this, but to an outsider looking in, and I mean even me, this looks like a cover-up." And I do think it kind of goes a bit to that touches on something to do with Costa, which is he said so many lovely, reassuring, progressive things about the police, and now it just is left when you read this report looking so hollow. You know, I don't want someone who says lovely things and then oversees something, you know, and then we find this out. It's worse, you know. At least let's be real. And it's worth noting that the other thing the government have moved is to appoint an Inspector General of Police in order to try and create another level of, I suppose, watchdoggery, which reflects something that exists in the intelligence service already.
Very, very strong response, I thought, from Collins and Mitchell yesterday. They must be furious too, because when you read the report, it looks like Costa was in there literally, hiding this information that was, all these complaints that were coming into Mitchell's office and diverting them back out through his staff that were in there, so that Mitchell was none the wiser.
Yeah, and that it is pretty extraordinary if it's true that Costa instructed, his private secretary, who are the officials who are seconded, basically to sort of act as a liaison between the department and the minister's office.
Essentially, police in Mitchell's office, police appointees in Mitchell's office. Yeah,
yeah, and if the claim is that they were instructed by Costa to not present any of those. Any of that correspondence, apparently 36 complaints about McSkimming to the minister or his political staff. I saw it raised on Twitter when I shared a snippet from that news story. Other people, if the complaints had come into the minister's office, other people would have had access to that email. That is true. But usually that would be sort of handled at a very sort of basic level. The ministerial secretary would basically just be sort of looking through saying, oh, this is a police thing, forward it to the police private sec. This is an emergency management thing in Mitchell's office, forward that to the emergency management private sec. And at that point, then they sort of, usually you'd say have a meeting and you'd say, oh, we've got these letters. Do you want me to respond to them? Or do you want me to get the police to draft the response? Whatever. And if they were just cut out of that process and just sort of referred immediately back to Andrew Costa for what turned out to not be very swift action or any action, that really is kind of remarkable. It's certainly the police, any secondee in a minister's office does, they technically still work for the department or the agency, but they certainly shouldn't be involved in sort of obfuscating or keeping things from.
Yeah, Ben, would you have expected that 36 emails and that one of those seconded staff members might say to Mitchell's actual staff, we've had quite a few of these. You might want to check in and see if there's anything to be concerned about there.
Look, public officials get harassed, and that was McSkimming's explanation for what was happening when he first raised it within the police. He said, I had an affair, it was consensual, she loved it, but now she's gone crazy because, I've ended things. And look, public officials do get harassed. I worked for the Attorney General, you get all sorts of sort of, email campaigns and things, but generally those will be flagged, because it's useful to know that as well. For it to be just sort of totally kind of off the radar, even if that is your explanation, that this is just a vexatious person, I would think would be unusual to not even be raised. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that goes to the point, doesn't it, that there are processes in place, and you can hear the frustration in Chambers' voice, because there are processes in place. If those had been given to the proper rank and file who go through those, the idea that we will make a decision at this top level that this person seems crazy and they're trying to end the career of this guy. And to be clear, the allegations have not been proven. But there are processes through which those go. They exist.
Yes, right.
Send it to this person that was just sort of deviated from that path is what is kind of so abhorrent.
And seemingly so deliberately. And, in particularly because it was, much of it was in aid of trying to get McSkimming the most important job in the police force. I mean, it's honestly extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think Costa would say, in order to give him a clear opportunity to make his case for that top role. Look, there'll be more to come on this, and so there should be. It ultimately comes down to a question of public confidence, I would say, more than anything, particularly victims, and so we'll probably have more to say about this. This week we have in Parliament, meanwhile, 2 newly independent MPs, following the announcement on Monday morning that the National Council of Te Pāti Māori had resolved to expel Maria Meno Kapakingi and Takuta Ferris for breaches of kawa, that's the party's constitution. Both MPs say they will fight the ruling. There are a few questions around some of the processes, including that the Te Tai Tokoro representatives, which is Kapakingi's electorate, did not vote, weren't invited to vote because they're resetting things in the electorate executive there. Meanwhile, in Te Tai Tonga, that's Ferris's electorate, the executive there abstained. So the question is live about whether or not that meets the requirements under the Constitution. It further invites questions about whether the so-called waka-jumping, party-hopping legislation will be invoked. It creates further questions about whether or not there is a viable role for Te Pāti Māori in a future coalition. I note that they were at pains, the co-leaders, Rawiri Waititi and Te Ngāti Wapaka, on Monday morning to say maybe 10 times that their overall goal was to make this a one-term government. So there was a very clear emphasis there on positioning themselves as ready to work to change the government. Oh, where does it leave us all? Annabelle, what are you seeing?
Can I say it's also interesting to note that there's grumblings in Waiariki amongst the Te Pāti Māori membership there, because they were invited to an urgent meeting that was supposed to take place before the Executive Council.
Right.
And then they got an email saying that meeting was cancelled, that Rawiri couldn't attend. And then
that's his electorate.
And then another email came out saying it was so great to meet with all the branches and have these courageous conversations and blah blah blah. It was RNZ reported on it, and and Mikey Sherman questioned them about it, and he kind of basically walked off from the press conference when she was quizzing him about that. Where are we now? Wow. I don't know. Schismy still, I'm still getting schismy vibes.
Yeah. And
this morning I saw a Facebook post, which unfortunately I scrolled past and can't find again, which it was a real blast from the past. It's Ikaroa Rāwhiti, which has been missing in all of this.
Yeah.
Ikaroa Rāwhiti was not invited, and Meka Whaitiri is furious as hell because she stands with Takuta Ferris and Maria Meka.
Right.
Meka Whaitiri has resigned as their strategy advisor. Her brother, who is chair of the executive of the electorate committee down there, has also resigned. So this has gone from a fire kind of burning at the top between the MPs and the leadership and the president to like a full-on wildfire fire that's now spread through like the membership of the electorates, all the way from Te Tai Tokedo right down to Te Tai Tonga. And I mean, interestingly, in all of this, we have Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka at a press conference trying to, convince the media that this is all completely normal and this is what happens in political parties. And it's great that it's happening this side of Did you hear that line? She said,
this is going to happen in all the parties next year. We're just getting it out of the way before Christmas.
Yeah.
Which I thought
tick that box. Boom,
the most
done.
Wishful thinking I've heard. Maybe she's right. Maybe she knows some stuff. It's like, hey, guys, we'll go first. All right? We'll do our ritual disembowelment first, and you guys can have the new year.
I mean, there's dramas and there's dramas, right? Like this is, in my mind, like a Jamie Lee Ross level of maelstrom. This is not your average like leadership coup or something like that. Like this is like a full-on bonfire.
It's happening in real time, right? It's kind of you got to keep an eye on your inbox. Sort of 10 p.m. Massive mail out, and then they're there on the tiles, tum to tum to tum.
And Jamie Lee Ross was one guy, right? One, sort of very chaotic guy. But as a number of people have pointed out, it's never happened that two MPs have been expelled from the same party at the same time. And there are still some pretty big questions. The first and most glaring is, what were they expelled for?
What for? Particularly Taku Te Whereas. I mean, you could say that there have been enough claims made already about Māori Mino Kapakingi that you could say, well, these are the reasons, including in that 10 p.m. mail out. But exactly, Taku Te Whereas, what for? Oh, just a few late night social media posts.
Yeah, I mean, a man loves to get on Instagram. It's not clear what they've been expelled for. There are two separate processes in the Māori Party constitution, one of which is for terminating someone's membership for breaching the kaupapa and the tikanga of the constitution, which if you actually if you're used to Western politics like me and you read that without sort of getting a headache, it's just pages and pages of sort of the importance of whānau and hapu and it's very airy stuff. It would be incredibly difficult to kind of pin any particular sort of action to any kind of particular tikanga or kaupapa that is described in there, particularly in terms of those two MPs. The second is the almost completely separate disciplinary and disputes process. That seems to be what's happened with the National Council. Now, that's another question mark, which is who is on the National Council and who made this decision, which Te Pāti Māori has refused to disclose. And I think I also saw in a social media post that the secretariat, that one of the members was an employee of Tamahere at Waipirena Trust, which raises some immediate
Well, we have
issues.
been told in no uncertain terms that John Tamahere is overseas, so clearly it's ridiculous to suggest that John Tamahere is involved in any of this. He's abroad.
And so, it's not clear who is on the National Council. The very convoluted disputes and disciplinary process that's described in the Constitution doesn't seem to have been followed, although it's hard to keep track. But I think it would be very, very hard to make these expulsions stand up if they were minded to, litigate it and ask for a judicial review. And beyond that, it seems as if control of the party structure is just totally slipping away from Tamahere and the co-leaders. And if you think back less than barely 2 months ago, when they had won that storming by-election victory in Tamaki Makaurau, which was their most marginal seat, they had absolutely, smashed Labour. and it looked as if, nothing was capable of dislodging Te Pāti Māori from those 6 seats. And they were a factor that both the left and the right of politics would have to contend with into the future. And in 2 months, the destruction of the brand, the trust, and the movement is just the fastest I've ever seen in New Zealand politics. It's extraordinary.
And, an amazing juxtaposition that was there even last week, I think it was, when you had Hana Rafti Maipi Clark in New York being garlanded, picking up an award from Time magazine for one of the 100, new leaders for her advocacy for Indigenous rights, and as a result of the haka that circled the earth and so forth, almost at exactly the same time. There are emails going out that are sort of look like they've been cut and pasted together from 7 different documents, making all sorts of accusations, it couldn't be a more compelling contrast.
No, and she's the youngest of them and the only one that knows how to behave appropriately on social media. I thought it was interesting this week too, speaking of Hana and Orini, when Rawiri and Deb were asked what their views were on the expulsion and how they voted. And they said, well, they don't actually get voting rights. They don't get to vote. And then they were asked, but how do they feel about it? Have you spoken to them about it? And again, there was,
They seemed to say they had not spoken to them at all.
Yeah, which was fascinating.
Which is a bit sort of surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, they did a sit down last week on Something with the People, Something for the People, my other favourite podcast, and there was some interesting kōrero on it because again the issue of the allegation of the budget overspend in Maria Meno's office came up, and Shay Milne raised a really important question, I think, which is as the leaders of the party, how is it that one of your MPs, if so, was allowed to overspend a budget by $100,000? Like, what kind of oversight do you have when it comes to managing, those sorts of situations, which I thought was interesting.
And very quickly, both of you, in terms of using the legislation that would remove the MPs from Parliament and require by-elections to be held, it's hard to see that being invoked, it seems to me, at this point, for a number of reasons, including they would need to get 2/3 of the caucus to support it, and it's not immediately clear whether that would be a straightforward thing, including that it would create 2 by-elections which they could lose, and for Te Pāti Māori to lose those by-elections, and they would also be accused of the expense involved. They probably wouldn't happen until March next year, I can imagine. They've got to happen 6 months out from the election. At least 6 months prior to an election, but that would just drag the affair again into the new year. So it's possible, of course, that either of the 2 MPs affected could say, "Well, I'm resigning my seat," and that will trigger a by-election too, which has happened in the past, including, I think, among other. Did Gaurav Sharma do that, or was he waka jumped? I can't remember. Winston Peters did it back in the day, didn't he, in Tauranga? So. Do you think that's something that's likely to happen?
That they'll get waka jumped?
Yeah.
Oh my! How on earth do you predict what's going to happen with this? Here I was thinking that they were going to go off and meet with iwi leaders, and but that got completely ignored. Yeah. So I don't know, but I think the irony of this is that their mantra over the last couple of weeks has been that, we want to change the government. And ironically, they may well do that, but not in the manner in which they were hoping, but rather by driving Māori voters back into the arms of Labour and giving Labour a stronger mandate where they're not constantly having to justify in the media what type of relationship they may have with the Pāti Māori.
Well, it was also interesting that Chloe Swarbrick posted a photograph of her having a cup of coffee on K Road, I think, with Orini Kaipara yesterday. And, Tanya Waikato, I remember, not that long ago, who had worked as a lawyer
representing them over the Haka stuff.
on the
Privileges
Privileges
Committee.
Committee has signed up as a candidate for the Green Party. So I imagine that it's very hard to imagine a world in which the Greens make an impact in terms of the electorates, but there is a sort of serious vote, including particularly an urban one, that I think that the Green Party might scoop some up of. Last word from you, Ben?
Yeah, look, it's impossible to rationally predict what they'll do. I can't imagine that they would invoke the waka jumping legislation, because I think Tamahiri probably knows that the process followed has been questionable enough that even if they somehow did manage to write to the speaker, it could easily be overturned. It would probably be in court until the election in any case. And, this is a disaster for them. There's only a certain number of votes that want to kaupapa Māori party, and I think probably a large attraction of that is that it's a unified kaupapa Māori party. The idea of the sort of nationwide encompassing movement of Toitu Te Tiriti was very attractive to people. If you just reduce it down to a couple of warring factions, I don't think that's of interest to a lot of voters at all. It will split the small majorities that they do have in most electorates. You could imagine Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngāti-Wipaka, and I would say probably just on personal appeal, Hannah Moby Clark holding their electorates, whichever parties they're in. But I think it becomes pretty marginal and very open to Labour to sweep the other Māori electorates at the next election. This is, just an incredible implosion. I would be astounded if more than those 3 MPs were back after the next election, and what an incredible time to do it. When the government is, amending the Marine and Coastal Area Act, passing the Regulatory Standards Bill, which, I don't agree with them, but Te Pāti Māoris were campaigning as, one of the biggest attacks on the treaty and Māoridom in history. The RMA reforms will be coming up at the end of this year. And I mean, Te Pāti Māori was barely functional as a political party in Parliament, or before it was more like a social media campaign with a parliamentary adjunct. Now it is just a flame war. It is just beef on the internet. Just an incredible waste. They've thrown it all away.
I mean, it's so hard to pick what's going to happen because we don't know what Hana and Orini, might do. But I think, there's a universe where potentially it is only Orini and Hana who win back their seats for Te Pāti Māori if they stay. But who's to know? Who knows what will happen? And at the end of the day, the people who are going to get the last word on this are Māori voters. They'll decide how this story ends.
Now, a nostalgic mood in the air as the leader of the National Party and the leader of the New Zealand First Party lock horns over asset sales. Following a Treasury report, Christopher Luxon has sort of, I guess, up the volume a bit on preparing the ground, to mix my metaphors, for a campaigning on asset sales at the next election. I heard John Key last year at one point saying there's not much left to sell, and there isn't a lot left in the cupboard, if we're honest. There's the Jen Taylors.
What have we got?
There's Jen Taylors, there's Pamu, or Landcorp, there's TVNZ, which I imagine is worth many, many billions of dollars. Actually, you'll be surprised to hear I've got an analogue from the 90s in politics, which is in 1997, Jim Bolger gave what was called his springtime speech, and he promised an era, a new era for New Zealand, and that it was springtime again in New Zealand. And he was saying that the things were turning around the economy. I'm not sure he used the word green shoots, but that was a very green shoots kind of music in the speech. And in that speech, he said he floated the idea of selling TVNZ. And he said, TVNZ, before long, at the turn of the century, there's going to be 500 channels out there. This asset's not going to be worth much. We can't control what they do anyway. Let's flick it.
Yeah.
And he mooted asset sales. Winston Peters at the time, who was on like New Zealand First was almost in negative numbers at that point, sitting in coalition in the first MMP coalition, said he disagreed with it because in the coalition agreement they were expressly ruled out, as they are now, asset sales. But it was an exercise in trying to differentiate, and that's what I think is going on a bit here. There's been a bit of back and forth in the House, Ben, which is quite entertaining. Winston has accused Christopher Luxon of mishandling or not correctly running the economy, and he's like wanton neoliberalism and all that sort of stuff.
It was a Morning Report.
Luxon comes, but it was instead of Corin Dan being the target this time, the Prime Minister seemed to be in the crosshairs, and then there was a bit of back and forth in Parliament. Quite a good line from Luxon on how our pronouns are we, referencing that tweet moment when Winston Peters got the pip over some foreign policy stuff. Christopher Luxon saying he's been in Parliament for 50 years. Winston Peters saying the numbers aren't wrong. Totally different to that. It's more like 46 years, I think. Anyway, but there's some sense in which maybe this is actually fine for both of them, like it's actually fine to set out their stalls. Clearly shows Winston Peters in campaigning mode, but maybe a year out, that's what we got now. They're not. No one is suggesting any assets get sold in the next year. It's after the election. Maybe it's fine.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of that in the coming year leading into the election, where I think New Zealand First realised being the handbrake wasn't actually a sufficient differentiator in government with Labour. So I think what we'll see is, some policies will just be allowed to run. A lot of policies, there won't be time to do much new stuff before the election in any case. And so you will see, the parties in government openly disagreeing on things as they seek to differentiate themselves. Asset sales, it's an incredibly unnuanced conversation in New Zealand. People have this allergic reaction, which sort of dates back to the 80s. And we don't make any real effort to distinguish between purely financial assets, like flicking off some debt that Chorus owes the government, versus what you might most generously call strategic shareholdings, like in the Gentailers and Air New Zealand, fully owned Crown companies and SOEs, like TVNZ, the monetary powerhouse, and then actual assets like schools, roads, things like that, where there's a much more complicated sort of arithmetic in terms of do you want to own it, or what's the model if you sell it off. And Treasury doesn't help things with their reports. They say the government owns $500 billion worth of assets. It's like, well, sure.
Winston Peters offering that line on RNZ that whether there are any assets that the state wasn't any good at running anyway, and he said, "Well, yeah, if you mean Treasury, yeah, sure." and what they're talking about in this program that the government's been doing, that New Zealand First is signed on to as a government partner, and with an associate finance minister, is the investigation into what's the rationale for holding this particular list of companies and shareholdings, most of which are real rats and mice stuff like Quotable Value New Zealand, valuation service. Why does the government own it? Should the government sell it? Probably. Is it worth wasting a lot of time for what you might get 20-30 million bucks for it? Somehow this has entered the discourse as this is a way of addressing New Zealand's structural deficit as, the population gets older, healthcare costs increase, and we go into permanent deficits with our social spending. Flicking off some of these rats and mice, even selling the Gentailer shareholdings, that's basically a one-off investment. The only way that it really addresses any kind of structural deficit is if you use it to, I guess, invest in a pyramid scheme, and your returns on the investment double every year. But there are probably limits to that, which I can't think of right now. I think this is it's sort of political theatre on all fronts. Nobody wants to admit that actually the assets that we've got left that are in the scope of this current review, it doesn't really matter if we keep them or sell them.
it's not in the interests of the keep them or the sell them crews to argue.
I mean, it's a bit like having a mortgagee sale on your house. So you're like, oh yeah, to help, we're gonna like sell the fridge and the chest freezer and like that old TV out the back that no one watches anymore. Like we'll get rid of that. Like this is not like genius economics, eh? I don't think it's the way that you like help to build a rich nation.
Well, look, speaking of creative economics, there have been a few shifts which I just think we should touch on briefly because it's important in terms of the Zero Carbon Act, which were kind of mysteriously announced last Tuesday night, I think it was. Press releases did not go out, as best I'm aware. I didn't get one. But they're quite important changes.
Maybe they could have asked to be on Te Pāti Māori's emailing list.
Yeah, that would have been a more effective way of disseminating the information. But I'm not sure that's what they wanted to do. Disseminate the information. I would encourage people to read Mark Dulder on Newsroom on this, who has got a really good kind of. He's been across this stuff as well as anybody. But essentially, on the back of diluting the methane targets, there is now a push to diminish the role of the Climate Change Commission and to decouple the emissions trading scheme from Paris targets. This is all happening while COP30 has just begun in Brazil. And there's this sort of, in terms of kind of performative politics, there's this strange thing going on where the Paris targets that we've signed up to, it seems that what one needs to do is to show that there are plans in place to address those Paris targets, not to achieve those targets. They're targets, and so there is an unwillingness to say we're not going to achieve those targets, but we're not, are we, Ben? I mean, this just really underscores that Paris is a bit of a dodo at this point. From a New Zealand perspective, we're not the only country for whom that's true. But that's the case.
I was going to say, not just from New Zealand's perspective. I mean, the last update I saw, and admittedly this wasn't particularly recent, was that I think basically no one was on track to meet their targets except Singapore. And so everyone's plan currently was to buy offsets from Singapore.
That'll be fine. As well as borrowing their approach to asset ownership, like, well, let's just subcontract Singapore to run the entire world and we're sorted.
Look, I think the noble lie of the Paris Accord is that almost probably just about close enough that it doesn't matter to no countries that have signed up to it will meet their targets. And as we hit 2030, one by one, countries will say, okay, we're actually just not going to pay. We're not going to pay for the offsetting because it's billions and billions of dollars. And I think New Zealand was in that basket as well. Nobody wants the first person to say, just like at a shared dinner or, nobody wants to be the first person to say, I left my credit card at home, I'm not putting in for it. But eventually there will come a time when everybody just makes a break to run out of the restaurant, knowing that management can't catch them all. And the National Party, I think, are very, they seem, to be kind of tracking that along with a lot of our peer countries, New Zealand First and ACT, both I think accusing each other of stealing each other's policies. I think ACT might have had it first, that they wanted to revisit the Paris targets and the commitments. But yes, so there. I mean, I think Paris we can put in the bin of sort of aspirational goals. And look, to be honest, I think it probably always was there. But as we get closer and closer, that will become more something.
It was meaningful to me that that this has all come out, on the same week that we've seen a wildfire rip through Tongariro. And I guess that's what we have to look forward to.
Well, on that cheery note, we will say farewell. Let me just mention quickly before going, if you are juggernaut curious, there is an event with, there are rapidly diminishing but a few remaining tickets to the event tomorrow, Thursday night, Thursday, November the 13th at the Embassy Theatre in Wellington. It's going to be a lot of fun. Linda Clark, Chris Wakaira, Chris Bishop will be there to tell us all about the impact of the Bolger Richardson years, what it was like covering it, what it was like growing up within it, and how it impacts our politics today. It'll be fun, I think. So come along for Cat. That's us. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tio. Thank you, listener. Thanks, members.